The dust of the Wyoming Territory hung in the autumn air as Eliza Parker stepped off the stagecoach into Shoshone City in 1874, her hands trembling against the worn fabric of her traveling dress. The journey west had been her salvation and her damnation all at once, for while it took her far from the clutches of men who had stolen everything from her in Boston, it had brought her to a strange land where she knew no one and had nothing but the meager contents of her trunk and the silent prison of her own body. Shoshone City was not much to look at: a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a saloon that seemed to be the heart of the town, and the scattered dwellings of those who had come west seeking fortune or escape. For Eliza, it was the latter. At 22, she had already endured enough cruelty to last several lifetimes. The stagecoach driver tossed down her trunk without ceremony, and Eliza flinched at the sound it made as it hit the dirt. She had been flinching at loud noises for 3 months now, ever since that night in Boston when everything had changed. "This is as far as I go, miss," the driver called down to her. "Shoshone City, Wyoming Territory. Hope you find what you're looking for." Eliza nodded her thanks, unable to offer more. Her voice had been silenced, not by choice but by trauma. The doctors in Boston had called it hysterical aphonia, a condition brought on by severe shock. They had told her family she might speak again someday, or she might not. Either way, Eliza Parker was now a woman without a voice in a world that already barely listened to women. She gathered her skirts and moved toward the only establishment that looked like it might offer lodging, a 2-story building with a sign reading "Silver Dollar Hotel." The afternoon sun beat down on her neck as she approached, and Eliza found herself wondering if she had made a terrible mistake in coming west. Inside the hotel, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes stood behind a counter. "Welcome to the Silver Dollar, dear," she said, taking in Eliza's travel-worn appearance with a practiced eye. "I'm Martha Wilson, looking for a room." Eliza nodded and reached into her reticule for the notebook and pencil she now carried everywhere. She quickly wrote, "My name is Eliza Parker. I need a room and information about employment." Martha read the note and her eyes softened. "Can't speak, dear." When Eliza shook her head, Martha continued without missing a beat. "Well, there's plenty to be done that doesn't require talking. Room's 50 cents a night, and as for work, let me think on that." Eliza paid for a week's lodging from her carefully counted savings. As Martha showed her to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor, Eliza wondered how long she could survive on what remained. She had fled Boston with only what she could carry and the small inheritance her grandmother had left her. "Rest tonight," Martha said as she opened the door to the room. "Tomorrow we'll see about finding you something. Shoshone City isn't Boston, but we look after our own here." Eliza's eyes filled with tears at the kindness, unexpected after the long journey. She wrote, "Thank you," and Martha patted her hand. "Supper's at 6 downstairs if you're hungry," Martha said, and left Eliza to unpack her few possessions. That night, Eliza ate alone in the corner of the hotel dining room, acutely aware of the curious glances from other diners. News traveled fast in small towns, and already people were whispering about the mute woman from back east. She kept her head down, focusing on her stew, wishing she could disappear entirely. It was at breakfast the next morning that Martha approached her with news. "The general store needs help with inventory and stocking. Owner's wife just had a baby and they're overwhelmed. Not much pay, but it's honest work." Eliza accepted gratefully, and by noon she was organizing bolts of fabric and counting nails at Henderson's general store. Mr. Henderson was a portly man with a booming voice that made Eliza jump at first, but his instructions were clear, and he seemed unbothered by her inability to speak. His wife occasionally appeared from the back room where she tended to their newborn, offering Eliza a tired smile. Days passed, then weeks. Eliza found a rhythm in her silent existence. She worked at the store during the day, took her meals at the hotel, and spent evenings in her room reading books she borrowed from Martha or writing in her journal long passages that no one would ever read, words she could not speak aloud. It was on a crisp October afternoon that he first walked into the store. Eliza was arranging a display of canned goods when the bell over the door jingled, and she looked up to see a man unlike any she had encountered in Shoshone City. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind, yet still handsome in a rugged way. His clothes were those of a working cowboy: denim pants, a worn shirt, boots caked with dust, and a hat that had seen better days. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, deep blue and strikingly alive against his tanned skin. "Afternoon," he said to Mr. Henderson, who was tallying accounts at the counter. "Need some supplies for the ranch. Winter's coming faster than I'd like." "Nathan Young," Henderson greeted him. "Haven't seen you in town for a spell. How are things out at the Lazy Y?" "Busy," the man Nathan replied. "Brought in the last of the herd from the north pasture. Figure we've got maybe 3 weeks before the first real snow." Eliza kept her head down, arranging cans with more attention than necessary, but she couldn't help stealing glances at the cowboy. There was something different about him, a quietness beneath his easy manner that intrigued her. "Got a list here," Nathan said, producing a folded paper from his pocket. "And I'll need it loaded in my wagon, if you don't mind." "Miss Parker can help you gather what you need," Henderson said, gesturing toward Eliza. "She's been organizing everything, knows where it all is now." Eliza felt her cheeks warm as Nathan turned his attention to her. She nodded in acknowledgement, wiping her palms on her apron. "Miss Parker," Nathan said with a slight tip of his hat, "appreciate the help." He held out the list to her, and as she took it, their fingers brushed momentarily. Eliza quickly looked down at the paper, focusing on the neat handwriting that listed flour, coffee, beans, salt, ammunition, and various other necessities. She moved through the store, gathering the items, aware of Nathan following her at a respectful distance. When she reached for a heavy bag of flour on a high shelf, he stepped forward. "Allow me," he said, easily lifting the bag down. "Wouldn't want you hurting yourself." Eliza nodded her thanks and continued collecting the items on the list. When everything had been gathered at the counter, Henderson began tallying the total. "That's quite a haul, Nathan," Henderson remarked. "Expecting company out at the ranch this winter?" "Just preparing," Nathan replied. "Last winter taught me not to take chances." His gaze drifted to Eliza, who was wrapping some of the smaller items in brown paper. "You're new to Shoshone City, aren't you, Miss Parker?" Eliza nodded, keeping her eyes on her task. "Miss Parker came from back east about a month ago," Henderson explained. "She's been a godsend in the store. Gets everything done without a fuss." Nathan seemed to wait for Eliza to speak, and when she didn't, he looked curiously at Henderson. "She don't talk," Henderson said in a lower voice, though Eliza could still hear him. "Martha over at the hotel says she can't, not won't." Eliza felt the familiar burn of embarrassment on her neck and cheeks. She hated being spoken about as if she weren't present, but it happened often enough. "I see," Nathan said, and there was something in his tone, not pity, but a kind of thoughtful consideration that made Eliza glance up at him. He was watching her with those striking blue eyes, and when she met his gaze, he offered a small, gentle smile. "Well, we all carry our burdens in different ways, don't we?" The simple statement, delivered without judgment, caught Eliza by surprise. Most people either avoided her or treated her with exaggerated sympathy once they learned of her condition. Nathan did neither. "That'll be $12.67, Henderson announced, breaking the moment. Nathan paid and then helped carry the supplies out to his wagon. Eliza followed with the smaller packages. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street. As they loaded the last of his purchases, Nathan turned to her. "Thank you for your assistance, Miss Parker," he said, then hesitated as if considering his next words carefully. "I come into town every few weeks for supplies. Perhaps next time you could help me again." Eliza nodded, surprised at her own disappointment when he climbed up onto the wagon seat and took the reins. "Good day to you," he said with another tip of his hat. Then he clicked to his horses and the wagon began to roll down the street toward the edge of town, where the vast prairie stretched out toward the distant mountains. Eliza watched him go, a strange feeling settling in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her, as if she were simply a person, not a curiosity or an object of pity. She returned to the store with her thoughts full of blue eyes and a kind smile. The days grew shorter and colder as October gave way to November. Eliza settled further into her quiet life in Shoshone City, saving her wages and writing letters to her younger sister back in Boston, the only family member who had supported her decision to leave. The letters were full of descriptions of the Wyoming landscape and the people of Shoshone City, but Eliza never mentioned the night that had stolen her voice. Some things were too painful to commit to paper. True to his word, Nathan Young returned to town several weeks after their first meeting. This time he came directly to the general store in the early morning before many other customers had arrived. "Miss Parker," he greeted her with that same gentle smile. "Good morning to you." Eliza, who had been sweeping the floor, set aside her broom and nodded in greeting. Mr. Henderson was in the back room taking inventory, so she moved behind the counter, ready to assist. Nathan seemed in no hurry, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "We've had the first dusting of snow out at the ranch," he said conversationally. "Not enough to worry about yet, but a reminder of what's coming." Eliza nodded, then reached for her small notepad that she kept in her apron pocket. She wrote quickly, "Do you need supplies today?" Nathan read the note and shook his head. "Not today, I actually came to deliver something." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "From Mrs. Young, my mother. She heard about you from Martha at the hotel and wanted you to have this." Surprised, Eliza accepted the package and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a beautifully knitted blue scarf, soft and warm. "Winter's harsh here," Nathan explained. "Mother thought you might need it, coming from the east and all." Touched by the unexpected gift, Eliza quickly wrote, "Please thank her for me, it's beautiful." "You could thank her yourself," Nathan suggested. "We're having a small gathering at the ranch this Sunday after church, sort of a pre-winter celebration. Mother asked me to invite you." Eliza hesitated, her pencil hovering over the paper. She had kept mostly to herself since arriving in Shoshone City. Uncomfortable with the attention her condition drew and unwilling to face the inevitable questions about her past. Seeing her hesitation, Nathan continued, "There won't be many people, just some neighbors and friends. Mother's a good cook and there's always music." He paused, then added more quietly, "No one would expect you to be anything other than what you are, Miss Parker." The simple assurance, offered with such sincerity, broke through her reluctance. Eliza wrote, "I would like to come, but I have no way to get there." "I can bring you," Nathan said, a bit too quickly, then smiled. "That is, I'll be coming into town for church anyway. I could take you out to the ranch afterward and bring you back in the evening." After another moment's thought, Eliza nodded and wrote, "Thank you, I accept." The smile that spread across Nathan's face was bright enough to chase away the November chill. "Wonderful. I'll call for you at the hotel around noon on Sunday then." After Nathan left, Eliza found herself touching the soft blue scarf and wondering what had possessed her to accept the invitation. She had deliberately avoided social gatherings since arriving in Shoshone City. Yet something about Nathan Young made her want to step outside the safe, silent world she had built for herself. Sunday arrived with clear skies but a biting wind that whispered of the coming winter. Eliza dressed in her best dress, a navy blue wool with minimal trim, and the blue scarf from Nathan's mother. She had attended church services in Shoshone City a few times, sitting alone in the back pew and slipping out before anyone could engage her in conversation. This Sunday, however, she found herself looking for Nathan as she entered the small white church. He was already there, seated beside an older woman with silver-streaked dark hair whom Eliza assumed was his mother. As if sensing her presence, Nathan turned and caught her eye, smiling warmly and gesturing to the empty space beside him. Eliza hesitated, then made her way to the pew. Nathan stood to let her in, and as she settled beside him, he leaned close to whisper, "You came." She nodded, feeling strangely nervous under the curious gazes of those nearby. "Miss Parker, this is my mother, Eliza Young," Nathan said, and the older woman leaned forward with a kind smile. "It's lovely to meet you, dear," Mrs. Young said. "Nathan has mentioned you. I'm so glad you're joining us today." Eliza nodded and tried to return the smile, though her face felt stiff with anxiety. The service began before any further conversation was necessary, and Eliza found comfort in the familiar rhythms of worship, even as she remained silent during the hymns that everyone around her sang with enthusiasm. During one particularly rousing hymn, she felt Nathan's gaze on her and turned to find him watching her with a thoughtful expression. He leaned closer and whispered, "Do you like music, Miss Parker?" She nodded, surprised by the question. "I thought you might," he said, then returned his attention to the hymnal in his hands. After the service, several people approached to introduce themselves to Eliza, having noticed her sitting with the Youngs. Nathan stayed close, somehow managing to deflect questions that might have made her uncomfortable without making it obvious that he was doing so. The ride to the Young ranch was a revelation for Eliza. She had never been outside Shoshone City since her arrival, and the vastness of the Wyoming landscape took her breath away. Rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains, the land a patchwork of browns and golds under the autumn sky. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Nathan asked, noticing her wide-eyed gaze. "Took me a while to appreciate it when we first moved here. I was 15, used to trees and green things back in Missouri, thought this place was the end of the earth," he chuckled. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Eliza nodded, understanding completely. There was something both terrifying and exhilarating about the openness of this land, a sense of possibility that she had never felt in the crowded streets of Boston. The Young ranch was modest but well-maintained, a sturdy two-story house, a large barn, and several outbuildings with corrals holding horses and cattle. As they approached, Eliza could see smoke rising from the chimney and several wagons already parked in the yard. "Home sweet home," Nathan said as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "Not much compared to what you're probably used to back east," but Eliza shook her head quickly and reached for her notepad. She wrote, "It's wonderful," and meant it. Nathan's smile was warm as he read her note. "Well then, let's not keep Mother waiting. She's been cooking since dawn." The next few hours were a whirlwind for Eliza. Mrs. Young welcomed her as if she were a long-lost friend, introducing her to neighbors and the two ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse near the barn. There was a married couple with 3 children, an elderly man who had been friends with Nathan's late father, and several other ranchers and their wives. To Eliza's surprise, no one seemed troubled by her inability to speak. Mrs. Young had apparently prepared them, and they addressed her directly, waiting patiently when she wrote responses in her notepad. The children in particular were fascinated by her writing talks, as the youngest girl called them. After a magnificent meal that featured a roast, vegetables from Mrs. Young's garden, and 3 different pies, the gathering moved to the main room where an upright piano stood against one wall. "Who's going to play for us today?" Mrs. Young asked, looking around the room. "Not me," called one of the ranchers. "Last time I touched a piano, my wife threatened to sell the cattle." Everyone laughed, and then Mrs. Young turned to her son. "Nathan, why don't you start us off?" Eliza watched with surprise as Nathan moved to the piano and sat down with apparent ease. His large hands, which she had thought suited only to ranch work, settled on the keys, and then music filled the room, a lively tune that had several people tapping their feet. "My son has many hidden talents," Mrs. Young said, sitting down beside Eliza. "His father insisted he learn piano when we still lived back east, said a man should be able to do more than work cattle." Eliza nodded, watching Nathan's face as he played. There was a contentment there, a quiet joy that transformed his features. When he finished the first piece, everyone applauded, and he immediately began another, this one slower, more melodic. As the afternoon progressed, others took turns at the piano. One of the ranch hands produced a fiddle, and the elderly friend of Nathan's father played a harmonica. The music filled the house, wrapping around Eliza like a warm embrace. She was so caught up in watching and listening that she didn't notice Nathan had moved to sit beside her until he spoke. "You look happy," he said softly. Eliza turned to him, surprised, and then realized that she was smiling, genuinely smiling for the first time in months. She nodded, unable to express how much this day had meant to her. "I've been wondering something," Nathan continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "The way you watch when people sing or play music. Were you a singer, Miss Parker, before you came west?" The question hit Eliza like a physical blow, wiping the smile from her face. Memories flooded back, standing on a stage in Boston, an audience watching, her voice rising clear and strong, and then later, much later, the hands around her throat, the warning hissed in her ear. Nathan must have seen the change in her expression. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I shouldn't have asked." Eliza shook her head and reached for her notepad with trembling fingers. "Yes," she wrote. "I used to sing." Nathan read her answer and nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a depth of understanding that frightened and comforted her at the same time. "I thought so," he said softly. "There's a sadness in your eyes when you listen to music, like you're remembering something precious that you've lost." Eliza looked down at her hands, unable to hold his gaze. No one had come so close to seeing through her since she'd arrived in Shoshone City. "Miss Parker Eliza," Nathan said, and the use of her first name made her look up again. "Whatever happened to you, whatever took your voice, I want you to know that you're safe here in Shoshone City at my mother's house, with me." The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet certainty, brought tears to Eliza's eyes. She blinked them back, unwilling to cry in front of all these people, but something in her chest loosened a knot of fear she had been carrying for so long that she'd forgotten it was there. As the gathering began to break up with the approach of evening, Eliza helped Mrs. Young and the other women clean up from the meal. When it was time to leave, Mrs. Young embraced her warmly. "You must come again, dear," she said. "Perhaps for Christmas, we always have a special dinner." Eliza nodded, touched by the invitation, and wrote a note thanking her for the wonderful day and the beautiful scarf. The ride back to town was quiet, the evening air growing colder as darkness fell. Nathan had tucked a warm blanket around Eliza's legs, and she sat close beside him on the wagon seat, grateful for the shared warmth. "I hope today wasn't too overwhelming," Nathan said as the lights of Shoshone City came into view. "Mother can be quite insistent when she wants something, and she's decided she likes you." Eliza shook her head and in the dim light wrote, "It was perfect, thank you." Nathan smiled, the expression just visible in the gathering darkness. "You're welcome, Miss Parker." When they reached the hotel, Nathan helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. For a moment they stood close together, and Eliza thought he might say something more. Instead, he simply tipped his hat. "Good night, Miss Parker, I'll see you soon." Eliza watched him drive away before entering the hotel, her mind full of music and laughter and the feeling of belonging that had enveloped her at the Young Ranch. The weeks following the gathering at the Young Ranch brought changes to Eliza's quiet life. Nathan began coming into town more frequently, often finding reasons to visit the general store. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, honey from his mother's hives, a pressed flower he'd found while riding the range. Each gift was presented casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But Eliza treasured each one. More significant than the gifts was the way Nathan spoke to her. He never seemed bothered by her silence, never rushed her when she wrote responses in her notepad, and most importantly, he talked to her as a person, not as an oddity or an object of pity. They developed a routine. Nathan would come to the store toward the end of Eliza's workday, and they would walk together through the small town, sometimes stopping at the cafe for coffee or hot chocolate as the weather grew colder. Through these walks and the notes Eliza wrote, Nathan learned bits and pieces about her life before Shoshone City, that she had grown up in Boston, that she had a younger sister named Clara, that she loved books and had once dreamed of seeing Europe. What she didn't tell him, couldn't bring herself to write down, was the full truth about why she had fled Boston and why she could no longer speak or sing. Some wounds were still too raw to expose, even to someone as kind as Nathan Young. For his part, Nathan shared stories of growing up in Missouri, of his father's decision to move west after the war, of learning to ranch in the harsh Wyoming climate, and of the years after his father's death when he and his mother had struggled to keep the ranch going. "Those were hard years," he admitted one December afternoon as they sat in the cafe, snow falling gently outside the window. "I was 19 when Pa died, thought I knew everything about ranching. Turned out I didn't know half what I needed to. Lost a lot of cattle that first winter, nearly lost the ranch too." Eliza wrote, "But you didn't give up." Nathan smiled ruefully. "Came close a few times. Mother wouldn't hear of it, though. Said Pa hadn't brought us all this way just for us to fail." He sipped his coffee, eyes distant with memory. "She was right, of course. We figured it out eventually. Now we're doing all right. Not rich by any means, but the ranch turns a profit most years." As Christmas approached, Mrs. Young made good on her invitation, sending Nathan to formally invite Eliza to spend Christmas Day at the ranch. Mr. Henderson, overhearing the invitation, immediately insisted that Eliza take both Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off. "Young lady works harder than anyone I've ever hired," he told Nathan. "Deserves a proper Christmas." And so on Christmas Eve morning, Eliza found herself once again in Nathan's wagon, bundled against the cold, heading out to the Young ranch. Fresh snow covered the landscape, transforming the browns and golds of autumn into a sparkling white wonderland that took Eliza's breath away. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Nathan said, noticing her wonder. "First real snow of the season always feels special." The Young ranch looked like something from a fairy tale, with smoke curling from the chimney and evergreen boughs adorning the porch. Inside, Mrs. Young had transformed the house with pine branches, red ribbons, and candles. "Eliza, dear, welcome." Mrs. Young embraced her warmly. "Nathan, take her things up to the guest room. Dinner will be ready soon." The next day and a half were filled with more warmth and joy than Eliza had experienced in years. Christmas Eve dinner was followed by carols around the piano, with Nathan playing and his mother singing in a sweet, clear voice that made Eliza's heart ache with longing for her own lost music. Later, sitting by the fire with cups of hot cider, Mrs. Young shared stories of Christmases past, including tales of Nathan as a boy that made him groan with embarrassment and Eliza's smile behind her cup. On Christmas morning, Eliza was surprised to find small gifts waiting for her beneath the modest tree in the corner of the sitting room, a pair of knitted mittens from Mrs. Young to match her scarf, and from Nathan, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials stamped on the cover. "Thought you might like something special to write in," he said as she ran her fingers over the soft leather. "Not just for notes." Eliza nodded, deeply touched. She had brought gifts as well, a hand-embroidered handkerchief for Mrs. Young, and for Nathan, a small sketch she had made of the view from his ranch based on her memory of that first visit. She had always been good at drawing, though few people knew it. Nathan stared at the sketch for a long moment. Eliza, this is wonderful." "I didn't know you could draw like this." Eliza ducked her head, pleased by his reaction. "You have many hidden talents, my dear," Mrs. Young said, admiring the sketch over her son's shoulder. "Just like my Nathan with his music." After a Christmas dinner that rivaled the Thanksgiving feast in its abundance, Nathan suggested a walk to help settle their meal. Bundled in coats, scarves, and in Eliza's case her new mittens, they set out across the snow-covered yard toward a small rise that offered a view of the entire ranch. "Mother likes having you here," Nathan said as they walked. "So do I." Eliza smiled up at him, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "In fact," Nathan continued, sounding uncharacteristically nervous, "I've been thinking. That is, I've been wondering if you might consider." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Eliza, would you allow me to court you? Properly, I mean." Eliza stared at him, stunned. In all her time in Shoshone City, in all her growing friendship with Nathan, she had never allowed herself to hope for this. A relationship, a courtship, these things required trust, required honesty. And how could she be honest with Nathan when she couldn't even speak of what had happened to her? Seeing her hesitation, Nathan rushed on. I know there are things you haven't told me, things you might never be able to tell me. I understand that. And I know that whatever happened to take your voice was terrible. But Eliza, I care for you just as you are, voice or no voice." Tears filled Eliza's eyes, freezing on her lashes in the cold air. She fumbled in her coat pocket for her notepad, but her hands were shaking too badly to write. "You don't have to answer now," Nathan said gently. "Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know how I feel." Eliza shook her head and, abandoning the notepad, reached for his hand instead. She squeezed it once firmly and nodded, hoping he would understand. The smile that spread across Nathan's face was answer enough. "Really?" he asked. When she nodded again, he let out a whoop that echoed across the snowy landscape, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, that wasn't very dignified." Eliza laughed a silent laugh, but a laugh nonetheless, and squeezed his hand again. Nathan looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. "May I? That is, would it be all right if I kissed you, Eliza?" The question, asked with such earnest respect, made Eliza's heart swell. She nodded, and Nathan stepped closer, releasing her hand to gently cup her face. His kiss was soft and warm against the cold air, a promise rather than a demand, and Eliza found herself leaning into it, her gloved hands coming to rest on his chest. When they parted, Nathan looked at her with wonder. "Merry Christmas, Eliza Parker," he whispered. The new year of 1875 brought both joy and challenges for Eliza and Nathan. Their courtship, conducted under the approving eye of Mrs. Young and the curious gazes of the people of Shoshone City, progressed steadily through the cold winter months. Nathan came into town whenever weather and ranch work permitted, and on Sundays, Eliza accompanied him to church and often back to the ranch for dinner. With the deepening of their relationship came an increasing need for honesty. Eliza knew that Nathan deserved to know the truth about her past, about what had happened in Boston to rob her of her voice. Yet every time she considered writing it down for him, fear clutched at her heart and she couldn't bring herself to form the words. It was Mrs. Young who finally broke the impasse. On a February evening when a blizzard had forced Eliza to stay at the ranch rather than return to town, the older woman found Eliza sitting alone by the fire while Nathan was out checking on the livestock. "You love my son, don't you, Mrs. Young asked, settling into the chair opposite Eliza. Surprised by the direct question, Eliza nodded, her cheeks warming. "And he loves you," Mrs. Young continued. "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. But there's something holding you back, something you're afraid to share with him." Eliza looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "My dear," Mrs. Young said gently, "I don't need to know your secrets, but Nathan does if you two are to have a future together. Whatever it is, it won't change how he feels about you." Tears stung Eliza's eyes. She reached for the journal Nathan had given her for Christmas. She carried it everywhere now, and after a moment's hesitation, wrote, "I'm afraid." Mrs. Young read the words and nodded. "Of course you are. Fear is what keeps us from taking chances, from opening our hearts, but love, real love, is worth the risk." She patted Eliza's hand and then stood, leaving her alone with her thoughts. When Nathan returned, stomping snow from his boots and bringing a rush of cold air with him, Eliza had made her decision. "Everything all right?" he asked, noticing her serious expression. Eliza nodded and held up her journal, indicating that she wanted to show him something. Nathan settled beside her on the sofa, and Eliza opened the journal to a page she had filled while waiting for him. Taking a deep breath, she handed it to him. "Are you sure?" Nathan asked, recognizing the importance of the moment. When Eliza nodded, he began to read. The words she had written told the story she had kept locked inside for months. How in Boston she had been a singer, performing in concerts and at society gatherings. How her voice had attracted the attention of a powerful man, a married man with political connections who had become obsessed with her. How she had rejected his advances, and how one night after a performance, he and two of his friends had been waiting for her. The attack had been brief but vicious hands around her throat, threats hissed in her ear, warnings of what would happen if she ever sang again or told anyone what they had done. She had tried to sing the next day and found she couldn't produce a sound. The doctors called it hysterical aphonia, a physical manifestation of psychological trauma. Her family, concerned about scandal more than her well-being, had hushed up the attack. Only her sister Clara had supported her decision to leave Boston and start a new life in the West. When Nathan finished reading, his hands were shaking with anger. "These men," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury, "do they still walk free in Boston?" Eliza nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "And your family did nothing." The incredulity in his voice was clear. Eliza wrote quickly, "My father didn't want to risk his position in society. The man who attacked me has powerful friends." Nathan set the journal aside and took her hands in his. "Eliza, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Those men should be brought to justice for what they did." Eliza shook her head and wrote, "It's my word against theirs, and I can't even speak to accuse them." "That doesn't make what they did any less wrong," Nathan said firmly, then his expression softened. "Thank you for trusting me with this. I know it couldn't have been easy to write down." Eliza hesitated, then wrote one more question. "Does it change how you feel about me?" Nathan's answer was immediate and certain. "Only in that I love you even more for your courage. You survived something terrible, Eliza. You rebuilt your life. How could I not admire that?" Relief washed over Eliza in a wave so powerful she thought she might collapse. Nathan gathered her into his arms, holding her as she cried not tears of sorrow this time, but of release. The burden she had carried alone for so long was now shared, and somehow that made it lighter. When her tears subsided, Nathan gently tilted her face up to his. "I love you, Eliza Parker. Voice or no voice, past or no past, I love you and I want to spend my life with you." Eliza's heart swelled with emotions too complex for words. She reached for her journal and wrote simply, "I love you too." Nathan's kiss was a seal on their shared understanding, a promise that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The blizzard that had kept Eliza at the ranch raged for 3 days, giving her and Nathan time to talk, or rather, for Nathan to talk and Eliza to write about what her revelation meant for their future. By the time the snow stopped and the roads cleared enough for travel, they had made decisions that would change both their lives. The first was that they would marry in the spring, as soon as the worst of winter had passed. The second was that Nathan would accompany Eliza back to Boston in the summer to confront her family and, if possible, seek justice for what had been done to her. "I won't let you face them alone again," Nathan insisted when Eliza expressed doubt about returning east. "And I won't let them silence you a second time." Mrs. Young was delighted by the news of their engagement, embracing Eliza and declaring that she had always wanted a daughter. "And perhaps," she added with a twinkle in her eye, "someday soon I'll have grandchildren as well." The idea of building a family with Nathan was both thrilling and terrifying to Eliza. She had never allowed herself to think that far ahead, had been too focused on simply surviving day to day. But now, with Nathan at her side and Mrs. Young's motherly warmth enveloping her, Eliza began to imagine a future filled with love and purpose. News of their engagement spread quickly through Shoshone City. Most people responded with genuine happiness for them, though Eliza overheard whispers questioning Nathan's choice of a mute wife. "What kind of marriage will it be?" one woman remarked in the general store, not realizing Eliza could hear her from the next aisle, "when she can't even talk to him." "Some men might consider that an advantage," her companion replied with a laugh, and Eliza felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. Nathan, when told of the incident, was furious. "Small-minded gossips," he muttered. "They don't understand what true communication is." Indeed, as winter gave way to spring, Eliza found that she and Nathan had developed a form of communication that went beyond words. She still wrote notes, of course, but increasingly they understood each other through glances, gestures, and the simple comfort of being in each other's presence. In March, Eliza moved out of the Silver Dollar Hotel and into a room at the Young Ranch. Though they would not marry until April, Mrs. Young insisted it made no sense for Eliza to remain in town. "Your family now," she declared. "Besides, I could use the help preparing for the wedding." The wedding preparations became a joy rather than a burden with Mrs. Young's enthusiasm and practical nature. Eliza continued to work at the general store, but her evenings and weekends were filled with sewing, baking, and all the tasks that went into planning even a modest frontier wedding. She wrote to her sister Clara, sharing her happiness and formally inviting her to the wedding, though she knew the journey from Boston was likely too arduous and expensive for Clara to undertake. To Eliza's surprise, Clara's response included not only warm congratulations, but also the news that she had saved enough money for the journey and would arrive in Shoshone City a week before the wedding. "I wouldn't miss my only sister's wedding for the world," Clara wrote. "Besides, I'm eager to meet the man who has brought the light back to your eyes." The arrival of Clara in early April was a moment of pure joy for Eliza. The sisters embraced on the platform as the train pulled into the Shoshone City station, tears streaming down both their faces. At 20, Clara was the image of Eliza, but with a vibrancy that Eliza had lost, or rather, had stolen from her. "Let me look at you," Clara said, holding Eliza at arm's length. "You look wonderful, Eliza. Wyoming agrees with you." Eliza smiled and quickly wrote in her journal, "It's not Wyoming, it's Nathan." "Well then," Clara replied with a grin, "I'm even more eager to meet him." Nathan had stayed back at the ranch, giving the sisters time together, but when Eliza brought Clara to the ranch that evening, he was waiting on the porch. Eliza watched anxiously as her future husband and her beloved sister sized each other up, but she needn't have worried. Within minutes, Clara was chatting comfortably with Nathan, and by dinner, Mrs. Young had declared that Clara was a delightful young woman with sense as well as spirit. Late that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, the sisters sat up Clara talking, Eliza writing about everything that had happened since Eliza left Boston. "Father still won't speak your name," Clara reported, her expression sad. "Mother cries sometimes when she thinks no one is looking. I think she regrets not standing up for you," Eliza wrote, "and him, the man who attacked me," Clara's expression hardened. "Still in society, still pretending to be respectable, but there are rumors, Eliza. Other women have started to whisper about him, about his attentions, nothing public yet, but..." Eliza nodded, unsurprised. Men like that rarely stopped at one victim. "I brought something for you," Clara said suddenly, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small, leather-bound book. "Your songs, the ones you wrote. I found them in your old desk and thought you might want them." Eliza took the book with trembling hands. She had indeed written songs before the attack, melodies and lyrics that had come to her in quiet moments. She had never shared them with anyone except Clara. "Thank you," she wrote, hugging the book to her chest. "You should share them with Nathan," Clara suggested gently. "Just because you can't sing them doesn't mean they should be lost forever." The idea took root in Eliza's mind, and the next day she showed the songbook to Nathan. He examined the notations with interest, his fingers occasionally tapping out a rhythm on the table. "These are beautiful, Eliza," he said, looking up at her with that special smile that made her heart race. Would you mind if I tried to play one?" Eliza nodded eagerly, and they moved to the piano. Nathan studied the notes for a moment, then began to play one of Eliza's compositions, a gentle, wistful melody she had written about the changing seasons. As the notes filled the room, Eliza closed her eyes, remembering how it had felt to sing, to express herself through music. When she opened her eyes, Nathan was watching her, his expression soft with understanding. "What song is in your heart now, Eliza?" he asked quietly. The question, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to her eyes. She reached for her journal and wrote, "A song of love and hope, a song about finding home." Nathan smiled. "That's the song I hear too." The wedding day dawned clear and warm, as if April had decided to gift them with an early taste of summer. Eliza woke in the room that had been hers for the past month, knowing that by nightfall she would be moving to the master bedroom as Nathan's wife. Clara helped her dress in the simple but elegant white gown they had finished just days before. Mrs. Young contributed the veiled, delicate lace that had been her own mother's. "Something borrowed," Mrs. Young said as she carefully pinned it to Eliza's dark hair, And something old too, I suppose. Clara fastened a small silver locket around Eliza's neck. Something new from me. Open it. Inside the locket was a tiny scrap of paper with the words, "Your voice lives on in your love," written in Clara's neat hand. "And for something blue, Mrs." Young added, presenting Eliza with a blue ribbon to tie around her bouquet of spring wildflowers, "a reminder of the first gift we gave you." Eliza embraced both women, too moved for words even if she could have spoken them. The ceremony, held in the Shoshone City church, was small but full of warmth. Nathan, handsome in a new suit, watched Eliza walk down the aisle with an expression of such love that she nearly stumbled. Pastor Williams, who had come to know Eliza over the past months, had worked with Nathan to adapt the traditional service to accommodate her silence. When it came time for the vows, Nathan spoke his clearly and firmly. Then, in a moment they had planned together, Eliza handed her bouquet to Clara and used sign language which she and Nathan had been secretly learning together to convey her vows. Though few in the congregation understood the gestures, everyone understood their meaning, especially when tears of joy spilled down Nathan's cheeks as he watched her hands form the words of promise and commitment. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Williams concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Nathan, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was sweet and reverent, a sealed promise between two people who had found in each other the completion of themselves. The celebration afterward, held at the Young Ranch, lasted well into the evening. There was food and dancing, laughter and music. Nathan played several songs on the piano, including one of Eliza's compositions, which he announced to everyone was written by his talented wife. As the party began to wind down, Clara found Eliza sitting alone for a moment, watching Nathan talking with some of the ranch hands. "Are you happy, truly happy?" Clara asked, settling beside her. Eliza nodded and wrote in her journal, "Happier than I ever thought possible." Clara squeezed her hand. "Then my heart is at peace. I was so worried about you, Eliza. When you left Boston, you were so broken, I feared you might never find joy again." Eliza wrote, "Nathan helped me find it. He really saw me when I was trying to be invisible." Clara smiled. "That's what love does. It sees us even when we're hiding." Later, as the last guests departed and Clara and Mrs. Young shooed the newlyweds toward their bedroom, Eliza felt a moment of panic. What if Nathan was disappointed in her as a wife? What if her silence became a burden over time? But when the door closed behind them and they were finally alone, Nathan took her hands in his and kissed each palm. "My wife," he said, his voice full of wonder. "My Eliza, I love you more than words can say, which seems fitting, doesn't it?" Eliza smiled through tears and raised her hands to sign. "I love you too." Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation for Eliza. Nathan's tenderness, his patience, his evident joy in her response to him, all of it healed something deep within her that she had thought would remain broken forever. In his arms, she found a new kind of voice, a way of expressing herself that needed no words. Spring blossomed into summer, and with it came the journey Eliza had both anticipated and dreaded, the return to Boston. Clara had extended her stay in Wyoming for several weeks after the wedding, but had finally returned east with a promise from Eliza and Nathan that they would visit by midsummer. The train journey was long and uncomfortable, but Nathan's solid presence beside her made it bearable. As the landscape changed from the open plains of Wyoming to the more populated eastern states, Eliza felt anxiety building within her. By the time they reached Boston, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely write in her journal. "We don't have to do this," Nathan reminded her as their train pulled into the station. "We can turn around and go home right now if you want to." Eliza shook her head firmly. She had come this far, she would not turn back now. Clara met them at the station, embracing them both with evident relief. "I was afraid you might change your minds," she admitted as she led them to a waiting carriage. "Eliza nearly did," Nathan said, squeezing his wife's hand. "But she's the bravest person I know." The Parker family home in Boston's Beacon Hill neighborhood was exactly as Eliza remembered it: imposing, elegant, and cold. As the carriage stopped outside, she took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. Clara led them inside, where they were met by a maid who took their bags and informed them that Mr. and Mrs. Parker were waiting in the drawing room. Eliza hesitated at the threshold, her courage faltering. Nathan leaned close. "Remember," he whispered, "no matter what happens here, you have a home and a family who love you." Eliza nodded and, with Nathan's hand firm at the small of her back, entered the drawing room. The reunion with her parents was as difficult as Eliza had feared. Her mother, a faded beauty whose nerves had always been delicate, burst into tears at the sight of her eldest daughter. Her father, stern and unyielding, barely acknowledged her presence, focusing instead on interrogating Nathan about his background and prospects. "A rancher," he said with poorly disguised disdain. "How, rustic?" "Yes, sir," Nathan replied evenly, "though I prefer to think of it as honest work that allows me to provide for my wife and, God willing, our future children." The mention of children seemed to soften Mrs. Parker somewhat. "Children," she repeated, dabbing at her eyes. "I had given up hope of grandchildren from Eliza." "Mother," Clara said sharply, "Eliza is right here. Please don't speak as if she isn't." The first dinner was tense, with Mr. Parker directing most of his conversation to Nathan and Clara, while Mrs. Parker made awkward attempts to include Eliza, asking questions that couldn't be answered with a simple nod or shake of the head. After dinner, when the men had retired to Mr. Parker's study for brandy, a custom Nathan found archaic but endured for Eliza's sake, Mrs. Parker approached her daughter hesitantly. Is he good to you?" she asked, her eyes darting to Eliza's journal, which was never far from her hands. Eliza wrote quickly, "Nathan is the best of men. He loves me exactly as I am." Mrs. Parker read the words and nodded, tears filling her eyes again. "I'm glad," she whispered. I should have done more, Eliza, when it happened. I should have stood up to your father, to society. I was weak and you paid the price." The admission, unexpected and clearly painful for her mother, touched Eliza deeply. She wrote, "It wasn't your fault, Mother. It was the man who attacked me." "Senator Harrison, Mrs. Parker said, speaking the name aloud for the first time in Eliza's presence. "Yes, it was his fault, and your father's for caring more about his business connections than his daughter's welfare, and mine for letting it happen." Eliza took her mother's hand and squeezed it, a forgiveness she hadn't known she had to offer until that moment. The confrontation with Senator William Harrison came 3 days later, not by design but by chance. Eliza, Nathan, and Clara had gone to the Boston Common for a walk, enjoying the summer sunshine and the relative peace after the tension of the Parker household. They were just discussing whether to stop for ices when Eliza suddenly froze, her face draining of color. Nathan followed her gaze and saw a distinguished-looking man in his 50s walking with a much younger woman, his daughter, perhaps, or possibly a mistress. "Is that him?" Nathan asked quietly, his body tensing beside her. Eliza nodded, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Clara, seeing her sister's distress, moved to her other side, creating a protective barrier between Eliza and the man who had destroyed her life. But it was too late for avoidance. Harrison had seen them and, after a moment's visible shock at the sight of Eliza, was approaching with a politician's smooth smile. "Miss Parker," he said, as if greeting an old acquaintance. "What a surprise to see you back in Boston. I had heard you'd gone west." His gaze shifted to Nathan and Clara, assessing. "Won't you introduce me to your companions?" Eliza's hands were shaking too badly to write, but Nathan stepped forward, his voice cold. "Nathan Young, Eliza's husband." Something flickered in Harrison's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or calculation. "Husband, how lovely. Congratulations, my dear." He extended his hand to Nathan, who deliberately did not take it. "Senator Harrison," Clara said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "I believe you were just leaving." Harrison's face hardened momentarily before the political mask slipped back into place. "Of course. A pleasure to see you all." He turned to go, then paused and looked back at Eliza. "I trust you're enjoying the silence, Miss Parker, Mrs. Young, I should say. It suits you." It was a deliberately cruel remark, a reminder of the threat he had made the night of the attack, and it was too much for Nathan. In 2 quick strides, he closed the distance between them and seized Harrison by the lapels of his expensive coat. "You listen to me," Nathan said, his voice low but intense. "I know what you did to my wife. I know you attacked her, threatened her, stole her voice. And I promise you this. If you ever come near her again, if you ever so much as speak her name, I will make sure the whole world knows what kind of man you really are." Harrison's face had gone pale, but he maintained his composure. "Unhand me, sir. These are serious and completely unfounded accusations. I could have you arrested for assault." "Go ahead," Nathan challenged. "Call the police, make a scene. Let's see how that works out for your reputation." For a tense moment, the 2 men stared at each other. Then Harrison's gaze flickered to where the young woman he'd been walking with stood watching in confusion, and to the other passers-by who had begun to notice the confrontation. "Release me," he said quietly, "and we'll forget this unfortunate incident." Nathan let go of Harrison's coat and stepped back, but his eyes never left the senator's face. "We won't forget," he said, "but we will move on with our lives, which is more than you deserve." Harrison straightened his coat, nodded curtly, and walked away without another word, collecting his young companion as he went. Eliza, who had watched the entire exchange with wide eyes, suddenly felt her knees give way. Nathan was at her side instantly, supporting her to a nearby bench. "I'm sorry," he said, his anger giving way to concern. "I shouldn't have lost my temper like that. Did I make things worse?" Eliza shook her head emphatically and reached for her journal with still trembling hands. She wrote, "You stood up for me. No one has ever done that before." "I'll always stand up for you," Nathan promised, pulling her close. "Always." The confrontation with Harrison, brief though it was, marked a turning point for Eliza. That night, back in her childhood bedroom with Nathan beside her, she slept deeply and without nightmares for the first time since the attack. The next morning, she woke with a strange feeling in her throat, a loosening, as if something long constricted was beginning to release. They stayed in Boston for another week, during which time Eliza's relationship with her mother improved considerably. Mr. Parker remained distant, but on their last evening, he called Nathan into his study for a private conversation. When Nathan emerged an hour later, his expression was thoughtful. "What did he want?" Eliza wrote, concerned by her husband's unusual quietness. "To apologize in his way," Nathan replied, "and to give us a wedding gift, a significant one." He named a sum that made Eliza's eyes widen. "He said it's your rightful inheritance, given early." Eliza wasn't sure how to feel about the money. It felt too much like her father trying to buy his way out of guilt, but Nathan suggested a use for it that changed her perspective. "We could build a proper music room at the ranch," he said. "With a better piano, and maybe someday you could teach music to children in Shoshone City." The idea of creating something positive from her father's belated attempt at reparation appealed to Eliza. She nodded, and for the first time since arriving in Boston, she felt at peace with her past. The journey back to Wyoming was lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from both of them. By the time they arrived home at the ranch, where Mrs. Young was waiting with open arms and a home-cooked meal, Eliza felt more whole than she had in over a year. That night, as they lay together in their bedroom, Nathan asked her, "Are you glad we went?" Eliza nodded and wrote in her journal, "It helped me let go of the fear. Being with you, seeing you stand up to him, it showed me that he has no power over me anymore." Nathan kissed her forehead. "He never did, Eliza. Your voice, your true voice, was always inside you. He couldn't take that away." The following spring brought significant changes to the young ranch. The music room was completed, a beautiful addition to the house with large windows that let in the Wyoming sunshine, and a new piano that Nathan had ordered from Chicago. Mrs. Young, who had initially been skeptical about spending good money on such frivolity, was the first to admit that the room brought joy to their home. Eliza's days fell into a pleasant rhythm. She helped with the ranch work, particularly the vegetable garden that had been Mrs. Young's pride and joy and was now Eliza's domain as well. In the evenings, she often sat in the music room while Nathan played the piano, sometimes attempting her compositions, sometimes just playing for the pleasure of it. It was during one such evening in May, with spring storms rolling across the plains outside their windows, that Eliza felt that strange sensation in her throat again, a releasing, a loosening. Nathan was playing a particularly beautiful piece, one of his own compositions that he had written for their first anniversary, when Eliza suddenly opened her mouth and hummed a single, soft note that matched the piano's melody. The sound was so unexpected that Nathan's fingers stumbled on the keys, and he turned to look at her with wide eyes. "Eliza, did you just—" She nodded, her own eyes wide with shock and wonder. She tried again, focusing on the feeling in her throat, and another note emerged, raspy and uncertain, but definitely there. "My God," Nathan whispered, leaving the piano to kneel beside her chair. "Eliza, you're making sound." Tears filled her eyes and she reached for her journal. "I don't know how, it just happened." "Try again," Nathan urged, taking her hands in his. "Just one note." Eliza closed her eyes, concentrating on her breathing, on the feeling of Nathan's hands holding hers, on the safety and love that surrounded her in this home they had built together. She opened her mouth and a sound emerged, weak and wavering, but definitely her voice. Nathan's own eyes filled with tears. "That's it," he encouraged. "That's wonderful, Eliza." Over the next weeks, Eliza worked to reclaim her voice. Progress was slow and frustrating. Some days she could produce several notes, even hum a simple tune. Other days, her throat would close up entirely at the first attempt. Nathan and Mrs. Young were unfailingly patient and encouraging, never pushing but always ready to celebrate even the smallest success. Dr. Wilson, the town physician who had occasionally checked on Eliza's general health since her arrival in Shoshone City, was cautiously optimistic when consulted. "The mind is a powerful thing," he explained. "Just as trauma caused your voice to disappear, healing and safety are allowing it to return. It may never be exactly as it was before, but with time and patience." By midsummer, Eliza could speak a few words, simple things like yes and no, please and thank you, and most precious to Nathan, his name. Her voice was husky and sometimes faltered mid-word, but it was hers. The first time she said, "I love you," to Nathan, the words barely audible but clear enough for him to understand, he swept her into his arms and danced her around the music room, both of them laughing and crying at once. "Do you know," he said when they finally stopped spinning, "what song is in your heart today, Eliza?" And for the first time she answered aloud, "Our song." The return of Eliza's voice, gradual though it was, seemed to herald other new beginnings as well. In August, she discovered she was pregnant, news that brought joy to the entire household. Mrs. Young was especially delighted, already planning all the things she would teach her grandchild. As Eliza's body changed with the growing life inside her, her voice continued to strengthen. By Christmas, she could carry on simple conversations, though she still relied on her journal for more complex communication. And she could sing not with the clear, strong soprano that had once captivated Boston audiences, but with a softer, more intimate tone that suited lullabies and quiet evenings by the fire. Nathan, ever thoughtful, suggested they invite Clara to stay with them for an extended visit. "She should be here when the baby comes," he said, "and I think your sister misses you." Clara arrived in January, just as Wyoming winter was at its fiercest. She brought news from Boston that Senator Harrison had lost his bid for re-election amid rumors of impropriety with young women, that Eliza's mother had finally stood up to her father and was now taking a more active role in society, advocating for women's causes. "And you'll never believe this," Clara added, her eyes sparkling with mischief, "but I've been corresponding with that nice ranch hand of yours, James, the one who played the fiddle at your wedding." Eliza and Nathan exchanged amused glances. "Is that so?" Nathan asked. "And does this correspondence have a particular purpose?" Clara blushed. "We're just friends, for now, but he did mention he might come to Boston on business this spring." The baby, a boy they named William Nathan Young, was born in early March, with Clara and Mrs. Young attending the birth while Nathan paced anxiously outside. When the midwife finally allowed him in to see his wife and son, Eliza was exhausted but radiant, cradling the tiny bundle against her chest. "He's perfect," Nathan whispered, sitting carefully beside them on the bed. "Just like his mother," Eliza smiled up at him. "He has your eyes," she said softly, her voice stronger now after months of practice and recovery. "And your spirit, I'd wager," Nathan replied, gently touching the downy hair on his son's head. "Strong and resilient." The weeks following William's birth were a blur of exhaustion and joy. Eliza discovered that singing came more easily than speaking sometimes, especially when she was soothing the baby to sleep. Nathan often found her in the nursery, rocking their son and singing lullabies in her gentle, husky voice. "What song is that?" he asked one evening, leaning against the doorframe and watching them with love in his eyes. "When I'm writing for him," Eliza replied, looking down at the sleeping infant. "About the stars over Wyoming and the strength of his father's hands and the love that brought him into being." Nathan crossed the room and knelt beside the rocking chair, wrapping his arms around both of them. "Sing it for me," he whispered. And she did, her voice gaining strength with each note, filling the room with a melody that spoke of love and healing, of finding home in each other's hearts, of the voice that had been silenced but never truly lost. 5 years later, the young ranch had expanded, both in acreage and in inhabitants. A second child, a daughter named Eleanor Claire, after both grandmothers had joined the family. And Clara had indeed married James the ranch hand, building a small house on the property where they lived with their toddler son. The music room had become the heart of the home, especially on Saturday evenings when friends and neighbors gathered for what had become a tradition: music and fellowship as a prelude to Sunday church services. Nathan still played the piano, but now he was often accompanied by Eliza's voice, which had regained much of its former beauty, though with a deeper, richer quality born of experience and overcoming. On one such evening in the spring of 1880, as the gathering was winding down and guests were departing, 5-year-old William tugged at his mother's skirt. "Mama," he said, his small face serious, "will you sing the star song, the one that's just for me?" Eliza smiled down at her son, who had his father's blue eyes and her dark hair. "Of course, my love, if your father will play for us." Nathan, who had been seeing the last of their guests to the door, returned to the piano with a smile. "The star song it is." As the first notes filled the room, Eliza gathered both her children close, William leaning against her side and 3-year-old Eleanor on her lap. Mrs. Young, now gray-haired but still spry, settled into her favorite chair by the fire, while Clara and James stood arm in arm near the door. Eliza began to sing, her voice rising clear and true in the melody she had created for her firstborn, but that had become a favorite of the entire family. It was a song of love and hope, of finding strength after loss, of voices silenced and then found again. Nathan, watching her as he played, thought back to that day in the general store when he had first seen her, a silent, wounded woman trying to disappear. How far they had come since then, how much joy they had found together. As the song ended, William clapped enthusiastically, and Eleanor, not to be outdone, joined in with her chubby hands. Eliza laughed a sound that never failed to delight Nathan, no matter how many times he heard it. "Another one, Mama," William pleaded. "One more," Eliza agreed, "and then bed for both of you." She glanced at Nathan, a silent question in her eyes, and he nodded, knowing which song she wanted. His fingers found the opening chords of the first composition of hers, that he had ever played, the one about changing seasons that had spoken to him of her strength and resilience, long before he fully understood what she had overcome. As Eliza's voice rose in song, strong and beautiful and fully her own, Nathan thought about the question he had asked her on the day they first acknowledged their feelings for each other. "What song is in your heart?" The answer, he knew now, was this: a song of love that had survived silence, a melody of hope that had emerged from despair, a harmony created by two hearts beating as one. It was their song, and it would continue long after the last note faded into the Wyoming night, carried forward in their children and in the love that had healed what once was broken. When the song ended, Nathan met Eliza's eyes across the room and saw in them everything he had ever wanted: home, family, love, and the quiet understanding that comes from facing darkness together and emerging into light. He didn't need to ask what song was in her heart anymore. He knew, because the same song was in his, a song that would never again be silenced.